The remainder of our workshop will focus on specific areas of the standard that we have found to be worthy of further discussion, as they may be new concepts to those of you new to T&I. It was noted to HWA Workplace Training there has been concerns stated by the laboratories regarding duplicity of requirements within the standard. We've combined key sections for each topic in this presentation to simplify these requirements. Please note that often there is a requirement in one portion of the standard, an example being 42840, to have a policy or procedure for a specific item, in this case customer confidentiality, in the quality manual, and then requirements of that policy procedure to be further detailed in a separate section, 415C in this case. We will cover this in more detail as we move through the sections of the standard. The perceived duplicity has more to do with how the standard itself is formatted and how it has evolved over time, rather than it's requiring multiple policies or procedures to address the same topic. Again, we have addressed this throughout the training materials you were provided and will attempt to call out a majority of the duplicative requirements as we go. Let's start with 4.3 and document control. Remember that a document is anything in use within the laboratory, which includes instructions. Document control, section 4.3, is a large section with a lot of different subtopics. Document control also is covered by 4284F and 5472. 5472 on controlling electronic documents will be discussed here in just a few slides. 4284F is just the requirement to have document control procedures, so let's cover 4.3. In section 4.3.1, the laboratory must have a procedure to control all documents, both internal and external. The standard does not specify the format of the procedure. Some may choose to have the traditional formalized and detailed procedures, or SOPs, and others may choose to have a process flow diagram, and maybe anything in between. A procedure may be housed in that formal SOP, the quality manual, or some other controlled document. In this particular instance, it doesn't give you any direction, but suggests 4 things that you can include in clause 4322, which states procedures adopted shall ensure that A. Authorized documents are available to the staff that are impacted by the procedure. In other words, purchasing doesn't need to have a copy of your test methods procedure to perform purchasing tasks. Not typically. Section B, documents are periodically reviewed. Please note that the EPA Safe Drinking Water Act requires the annual review of documents. Section C, that invalid or obsolete documents are removed from use. And D, obsolete documents are labeled as obsolete, or if they are used for informational purposes, then they are so labeled. If you recall from earlier in the class, when you see the phrase shall ensure, it means the outcomes of the process or procedure has to demonstrate the conditions have been met and doesn't explicitly require them to be in the procedure itself. Is it a good idea to include them? Absolutely. Is it recommended? It's up to you. Section 4321 on document approval and issue. All documents used must be approved. This includes cheat sheets posted in the laboratory as reminders. You must have a master list of documents. The idea here is that an individual always has a list of current documents that are approved. Assessors often find that analysts tend to keep old SOPs and reference them. On the slide, you see an example of a master list. Note that the example provided includes the document ID, the current revision status, and the distribution of documents within the laboratory. The master list does not have to be in a table format as you see here. Maybe all of your documents are housed electronically. It may be in a system like Qualtrics or on SharePoint. It could simply be a folder on your network drive where the current documents are housed. It's always wise to have either PDFs or, at a minimum, locked Word documents if electronic copies are available, so they don't get unintentionally altered by the users. If your documents are housed in an electronic system, then perhaps the master list is the folder that they are housed in itself. However you choose to do it, make sure that you document the how in your quality manual or additional SOP when you describe your document control system. Please ensure that your master list includes such items as SOPs, your quality manual, any forms or bench sheets, as well as external documents, including the T&I standard, applicable regulations, reference methods, including standard methods or EPA methods, and instrument manuals. 4323 states that documents must be uniquely identified. They must have revision dates, page numbers, and an end-of-document marking or authorizing signature. The revision identification can appear in several formats and locations within a document. In the document itself, some may call it a revision date, others a release date. Others yet may choose to call it a revision, like 1.3, and place a letter after it. Outside of the document, some people include the revision identification in the file name or in the properties of the document. For those entities that have a LIMS or other server-based or cloud-based quality management systems with electronic release functionality, these can be captured in the system itself. Page numbers are an end of document marking. The standard gives some lateral on page numbers or identifying the end of the document. Paper-based or equivalent systems, when the documents could be printed, the key here is ensuring that there is documentary traceability, meaning if a page is printed and could be mixed up with other documents, that it is readily identifiable to the specific procedure. Under these circumstances, the page numbering appears in the footer, but the header also includes the title of the document on each page to mitigate possibilities of possible confusion. The issuing authority is simply the person who is identified as being able to sign off on the document. We want to make sure that documents are reviewed and approved. 4331, in this clause, the standard is requiring that the review and approval to changes are performed using the same function that was done when the document was originated. So if we go back to 4321, it states that those who review and approve these documents have to be authorized. It also states that the master list would need to be updated. And the laboratory should identify what the current revision status is. Where practicable, we need to identify the altered or new text within the document. Practicable is an interesting word. It means that something is able to be done or be put into practice successfully. Many people confuse this word with the word practical. So the issue here is not the practicality of doing something, rather the ability to practice or put into action something. So when we put the two words where practicable together, it gives the person who is authorized to make these changes the requirement to make the changes. The reason the person be authorized is so the person making the changes has been deemed competent to achieve this task. Documentary change management may be accomplished in many different ways, depending upon the platform on which the document is delivered. 4332 and 4333 specifically focus on paper-based document or equivalent systems in a document file structure. Then you may have examples that are identified here on the slide, where you have strike-throughs or lineouts, underscores, and changing color of text. You may also make the changes by including a document revision history at the end of the document or at the beginning, whichever you choose. In some cases, the practicableness of doing this may be very difficult, especially if you have a software-based process or procedure and need to make document changes. This is covered in Clause 4334. Many laboratories do not allow the changing of documents by hand. However, for those labs that do, Clause 4333 puts some caveats around it. 1. The procedure has to be defined. As an auditor or assessor, I would expect to see a written procedure for the amendments. And 2. Those who are in authority over the amendments must be defined in the document and deemed to be competent. While this section does not require that you have a policy for the allowance of changing documents by hand with proper documentation, they also must be updated as soon as possible. My rule of thumb is generally during the next internal audit. An example might be that a staff change requires an update to the organizational chart housed within the quality manual. A single line through the name, a date and initial, and writing the new name could suffice for making an immediate change. And then during your internal audit, you would go back and actually revise the quality manual and that organizational chart. We have to remember at the time ISO IEC 17025-2005 was released, a majority of the laboratories did not have computer-based systems. However, to cover all of these bases, ISO included a specific clause on computerized systems with the understanding that the future will bring mostly computer-based systems and programs. Enterprise Resource Planning Software, ERPs, and LIMS, Laboratory Information Management Systems, process software and databases that would eventually make paper-based systems obsolete. So this clause includes all of the requirements of the three previous clauses within 433. Another key takeaway from this clause is that you don't want just anybody to be able to access and change a document. To summarize, the purpose with the clause 433 is to ensure that changes are communicated to the staff that will be using the procedure, so the product or service provided to the customer is consistent and meets expectations or requirements. These methods of change communication may forego formal training or other types of training, especially when the changes are subtle and where the rigor of training is not necessary. Where the changes are significant and could, if not followed precisely, impact the product or service, training is encouraged. See 522 and 527 on training. Note that sections 431, 432, 433, and 5472 of the explanations from the training guide further discuss the concepts we have covered thus far. You can access the information and the tools that were provided to you, and the procedures for these sections are included as well. Please refer to your learner guide for examples of both conformant and non-conformant document control procedures. The focus for you in your own development of procedure is to build a procedure that will work for your laboratory while ensuring compliance with the standard. Don't overcomplicate things that can be kept simple. Remember that you will be held to whatever you write, so ensure that it is feasible and works for your laboratory. Non-conformant procedures generally don't contain all of the requirements. Some of the most common deficiencies that we as assessors see during assessments include master lists of documents not being maintained, laboratories not realizing that they must also control external documents, uncontrolled documents being found throughout the laboratory, including notes, cheat sheets, and etc., and obsolete documents being found in use.